Hello everyone, if you want to be able to take on just about anything as a solo player, then this Life Staff Sword and Shield build will be great for you. And if you're going to be playing as a solo player a majority of the time, but every now and then you want to do some elite runs with some other players, so you're going to be in a party and they need a healer, this build will be great for that as well. In terms of the skills for the Life Staff, on the left side, we're going to start off with Absolved. So the Life Staff's light and heavy attacks no longer consume mana. This is a very basic skill, and yet it's very important because the less mana that you're draining, the better, so that you have more mana for the rest of your abilities that you're going to be using to help keep yourself alive. And then continuing on down, we're going to use Mending Touch. Heavy attacks now remove one buff when passing through an ally. This is one of those abilities that, no, it's not going to be used for yourself, but if you are doing some of those runs in elite areas, this is going to be very beneficial for helping keep your team alive. And then just to the left, this is our first ability we're going to be using, Sacred Ground. This creates an aura on the ground with a 3-meter radius that lasts for 12 seconds. Allies in the area are healed for 16% weapon damage every second. And this costs 15 mana, and there's a 19-second cooldown. Just about every healer, no matter their build, they're probably going to be using Sacred Ground. This is a very important ability, and it's one of the best healing abilities. And then continuing on from this, we're going to be going down and getting Holy Ground, which is going to improve the Sacred Ground ability. This allows you to regenerate stamina and mana 50% faster while in the Sacred Ground circle. And then we're going to finish off getting the last upgrade for this, and that is Blessed. While allies are in Sacred Ground, they are healed for 50% more from all healing. And this works for yourself as well. If you're standing in Sacred Ground and then you use one of the other abilities over here called Light's Embrace, which this heals the target for 80% weapon damage plus 30% more for each buff on that target. If you use this ability on yourself while you're standing in Sacred Ground, almost your entire health bar is going to be healed. So you can go from practically 0 health, and then my character has about 11k health when I have my sword and shield equipped, and I can go from basically 0 health almost all the way up to the 11k. It's not going to quite reach there, but it's just about a complete full heal as long as you're standing in the Sacred Ground and you have the Blessed ability unlocked. So it's very powerful. Definitely recommend getting this one. Then we're also going to be using Desperate Speed. When you heal an ally below 50% health, Life Staff ability cooldowns are reduced by 10%. Can only be triggered once every 5 seconds. So this is another ability that's going to be beneficial not only for you, but also for your allies. If you're below that 50% health mark and you heal yourself, that's going to reduce the cooldowns on the rest of your abilities, or the same goes for healing your allies. Then we're also going to get Revitalize. When you hit with a light attack, reduce Life Staff ability cooldowns by 5%. This one can be beneficial for you as a solo player, but I mainly use this one when you're playing with a group of players and they need a primary healer. So if you have your Life Staff out the majority of the time, you can just keep on popping light attacks and keep reducing the cooldowns on the rest of your abilities. And as long as you're hitting those light attacks, you're basically going to have your Sacred Ground, Light's Embrace, and Beacon abilities available almost the entire time you're healing your team. And that's going to drain your mana very fast, but as long as you use these abilities at the right time and you have a couple mana potions with you, you'll be just fine. And then we're going to get Enchanted Justice. When hit in battle, activate a healing aura for you and nearby friends in a 4-meter radius. The aura heals for 8% weapon damage each second for 6 seconds. Cooldown 120 seconds. So though there's a 2-minute cooldown on this will still be beneficial for keeping you alive every now and then. Then next we're going to get Intensify. When you hit with a heavy attack, gain a stacking 10% bonus to healing effectiveness for 10 seconds. Max 3 stacks. So this is going to be another one of those abilities you're going to use when you're in a party primarily. And what I like to do is shoot heavy attacks until I have that max stack for 10 seconds. Then I'll swap over to light attacks and just keep on spamming light attacks to reduce the cooldowns of these 3 abilities. And just about when the 10-second stack is over, then that's when I'll shoot another heavy attack to refresh that 10-second cooldown. And then just keep rinse and repeating that process. And then over to the left, we've got Sacred Protection. While holding a Life Staff, increase the amount of incoming healing to all friendlies in your group by 5%. That includes yourself. And then we have Divine Blessing. When you heal an ally below 50% health, they are healed for 30% more, which once again, this will benefit you, but also the teammates that you may have if you're in a party. And then over on the right side, we have Bend Light. After a dodge, your heals are 20% more effective for 5 seconds. The way I see it, you're probably going to be using this a lot, whether you're playing as a solo player or if you're playing in a party. Dodges are very useful for evading attacks or for just getting around enemies when you need to run around them. Basically, you're going to be activating this Bend Light ability almost all the time. And for those 5 seconds while it's activated, activated, your heals are going to be more powerful. And then moving over to the right is our third ability, Beacon. So this allows you to shoot out a light projectile that deals 146% weapon damage to enemies. It attaches to its target and heals all nearby allies for 16% weapon damage each second for 10 seconds. And then this costs 16 mana, has a 34-second cooldown. Now this ability can attach to not only enemies, but it can also attach to your allies. And whatever it's attached to, like the description says, it's going to stick to them, and then it'll just keep on healing any allies within that vicinity, including yourself. And then we're going to get all of the upgrades for this ability. So the first one is Infused Light. Beacon's area of effect is now 50% larger. Very useful for keeping your teammates alive, or even for keeping yourself alive if one of those enemies starts moving away from you when you're playing as a solo. Then we're going to get Radiance's Blessing. Beacon lasts 5 seconds longer. Very useful for keeping this ability going and then keeping those heals coming. And then finally, Speed of Light. When Beacon heals a target, it also applies 20% haste for 3 seconds. Haste increases movement speed. This one I really like because when you're in the heat of battle, whether it's player versus environment, or if you're in a PvP situation, regardless of the situation, if you have your Beacon ability on an enemy target, or if it's on an ally, having the haste applied will further allow you to get out of the way of attacks. Or if you shoot the Beacon onto an enemy that's trying to evade from you, it'll allow you to catch up to them, or it'll allow your teammates to catch up to them, because the haste not only applies to yourself, but any allies that are in the Beacon. And then moving back up to the left over here, we've got Protector's Strength. If you have a buff, heal for 10% more. And based on this Sword and Shield build, along with this other ability we have over here, the Intensify, when you hit a heavy attack, gain a stacking 10% bonus to healing effectiveness for 10 seconds. Basically, you're going to have this Intensify ability on almost all the time, not to mention the Bend Light ability and any other buffs you might get from healing. And then your Sword and Shield build that I'm going to show is going to give you buffs. So you're almost always going to have a buff on, and you're almost always going to get a 10% bonus to your healing as long as you have this skill unlocked. And then back over here, we're using Light's Embrace, which I just slightly covered just a little bit ago. Heal target for 80% weapon damage plus 30% more for each buff on that target. So this one is very beneficial for target healing. Whether you're healing yourself or healing any teammates, you can strictly heal them for quite a bit of health. And then if they're, once again, if they're standing in that sacred ground with Blessed unlocked, you're going to do some massive heals. And then finally, we have Glowing Focus. Life Staff buffs you grant last 20% longer, which that can apply to any of the buffs that you use on yourself or any of the buffs that you give to your allies. For example, this Haste, that'll be 20% longer now. Or this Intensify, that's going to be 20% longer than the 10 seconds that it says it stacks for. And then something I haven't done, but I've been considering doing, this Enchanted Justice is useful, but instead of using this ability, you could also equip something like this. Protector's Touch. Life Staff's light and heavy attacks grant 15% Fortify for 3 seconds when hitting an enemy. Fortify reduces incoming damage. So this wouldn't be necessarily as beneficial for yourself when you're playing as a solo, but if you're playing in a party and you need to be really close to the fighting, like say you put Sacred Ground on your teammates and then the enemy keeps on attacking you, so you want to stand in the Sacred Ground as well, which means you're going to be close to the combat, right? Well, if you use this Protector's Touch ability, you're going to have Fortify on, 15% Fortify, so you're going to take 15% less damage. And if you're standing really close to the action, this would probably be pretty useful. And I may consider changing to this ability rather than the Enchanted Justice in the future. And then moving over to Sword and Shield, the first ability we're going to be getting is Whirling Blade. This allows you to deal 145% weapon damage to all foes within 2 meters. And then there's a 14.6 second cooldown on this. And then we're going to get both of the upgrades for this ability as well. The first one being Opportunity. Whirling Blade inflicts a 5% rend for 10 seconds, and then rend reduces target's defense. Basically, you're reducing the resistance of your enemy, which will allow you to do more damage to them. And then we're going to get Tactical Strike. Whirling Blade reduces its own cooldown by 10% for each enemy hit. And this is going to be really massive if you're dealing with a bunch of enemies all at once. Let's say you're surrounded by 5 enemies. Well, instead of a 10% reduction in cooldown, then you're going to get a 50% reduction in cooldown, which will be really beneficial, allowing you to use this ability again, but also the other 2 abilities we're about to cover. But before we move on to those other 2 abilities, over to the right, we have the Empowered Stab ability. Successful heavy attacks grant you 30% in power for 5 seconds, and Empower increases your damage. So basically, you're going to do 30% more damage for 5 seconds when you do a heavy attack. And because of this, you're going to want to use heavy attacks as much as you can. Basically, once the 5 seconds is over, then you're going to want a heavy attack again, and always make sure that you have that Empower stacked, because that extra damage damage is very beneficial. And then over to the right, we're going to be using Achilles Heel. The final attack in your light attack chain inflicts a 20% slow for 2 seconds, and then slow reduces target's movement speed. You are pretty frequently going to be using light attacks, and then you're going to be using the light attack combo. So you're almost always going to be putting that slow onto your enemy. And then because of these two abilities, what I like to do is I'll first heavy attack, get the empower on, and then I'll do a light attack combo to inflict the slow, and then I'll switch right back over to using the heavy attack again to get empowered back. And then moving down the list, we're going to get Freeing Justice. Successfully hitting with a heavy attack causes you to lose 1 debuff. This is one of those abilities I wasn't sure about initially, but I have found it to be extremely useful. Let's say you get hit with a 10-second bleed or a 20-second poison, whatever the case may be, you just do 1 heavy attack and then that debuff is gone. It's only 1 at a time, but most of the time when you're fighting just AI enemies, you're probably only going to have 1 debuff from the enemy. Unless you're in some type of elite area, you're probably not going to have to worry about more than just a single debuff. So a single heavy attack, which you're going to be using heavy attacks frequently to get that empowered, every time you heavy attack, that debuff is just going to disappear, which losing that debuff will help keep you alive. And then moving down the list, we're going to use counter attack. When you block an attack, gain a stack of 3% empower for 5 seconds. And then just like I had talked about before, empower increases your damage, and this can stack up to 5 times. Essentially, you can get another 15% empower for 5 seconds every single time that you're blocking. Because you're going to be attacking frequently, you're probably not going to get all the way up to that max 5 stacks of empower, but you might get a couple stacks every now and then, and that's just more damage you can add to the total extra damage that you're getting from your empower from your heavy attacks. So any extra damage we can get, we're going to take. And then over on the left, we're going to be using Precision, Sword and Shield, critical strike chance increased by 10%. Every single time that you critical, you're going to be doing even more damage with that critical damage. And then for example, this can be made even better if you have critical chance increase on some pieces of your gear. I have this ring with Keen Awareness on it, and that gives me plus 11% critical chance. So instead of that 10% critical chance, I actually have 21% critical chance when I'm using Sword and Shield. And then moving down the list, we're going to be using Opportunist, deal 10% more damage to slowed foes. This will be very beneficial after you're done with that light combo attack, which we covered just up here, Achilles Heel. After that light attack chain is finished and you do that combo attack, you get that 20% slow for 2 seconds on that enemy. Basically, for 2 seconds, we have a chance to do 10% more damage to that slowed foe. And not only that, that's also going to benefit our second ability we're going to cover, which is called Leaping Strike. And on this ability, before I cover what it is, there's an upgrade we're getting for it called Cowardly Punishment. If Leaping Strike hits a target in the back, it inflicts a 50% slow for 8 seconds. If we do happen to get behind an enemy and we do a Leaping Strike on them, essentially we have 8 seconds that we can do 10% more damage to them because of the Opportunist ability that we have. And then back up here, the Leaping Strike ability, this allows you to leap 6 meters and deal 150% weapon damage. And then there's a 17.5 second cooldown on this. Very beneficial for covering ground. And then we're getting both upgrades for this. So the first one is Final Strike. If you hit a foe below 30% health, deal 50% more damage. If someone's running away from you, say you're in a PvP setting, or if you're just using this on some type of AI enemy, you're going to be doing 50% more damage to finish them off. And then the final upgrade we're getting is Cowardly Punishment, which we just covered this. And then just over to the left, we're going to be getting Critical Precision. On critical, gain 20% haste for 5 seconds. So haste, that's going to increase your movement speed. And then because of our precision ability, which gives us a 10% chance of critical, and then if you have any critical chance increase on your gear, whatever your critical chance is, the more times you can critical, the more chances you have at getting 20% haste as well, which will help you get away from enemies' attacks or catch up to enemies that are trying to get away from you. And then finally, the third ability we're going to be covering is Reverse Stab. This is a stab attack that deals 175% weapon damage. There's a 19.4 second cooldown on this, and then we're going to get both upgrades. The first upgrade is Unstoppable Stab. Reverse Stab now has Grit, and Grit prevents you from being staggered by incoming attacks. This one's really useful, especially if you're taking on a ton of enemies at the same time when you're playing as a solo player. Basically, the moment you activate this ability, it's going to follow all the way through and you're going to land that hit on those enemies. And then the final ability on this is Tactician. On a successful hit with Reverse Stab, all sword cooldowns are reduced by 25%. Not only do we have this reduction in cooldowns from Tactical Strike for our Whirling Blade ability, but we also have the reduction cooldown from Tactician for our Reverse Stab. And I noticed this one being the most beneficial, especially if all of the enemies are clumped really close together. Basically, every time you use this Reverse Stab ability, if you have at least least 4 or more enemies really close clumped together around you, and you use this and it hits all of them, you're instantly going to have access to all of your sword abilities once again. And then finally at the bottom, we have leadership. While holding a sword, the damage of all group members is increased by 10%. So not only does this benefit party members, but this benefits yourself. You're going to be doing 10% more damage always because you have this leadership ability. And then moving over to the right, our final two abilities. The first one is Sturdy Shield, grants an additional 15% physical armor. So as long as your sword and shield is out, it's going to be a lot harder to kill you because of this Sturdy Shield ability. And then our final ability, Defensive Training. When you block an attack, gain 10% Fortify for 5 seconds. And once again, Fortify reduces incoming damage. And you're probably going to be blocking a lot, so you're almost always going to have this 10% Fortify activated because of this ability. And in terms of stats for attributes, I've put all of my stats straight into Focus. And I would eventually like to get this up to 300 Focus and then 150 Constitution. When I have my sword and shield equipped, I have 290 Focus and 163 Constitution. So if I took some of that Constitution away, I would right now have that 300 Focus and 150 Constitution mark. And ideally, I think that's what you would want to shoot for as well if you're doing the same build as me. Because if you can get to that 300 Focus mark, then you're going to be healing for as much as possible. And you're also going to be doing as much damage as possible, and I'll cover why in just a second. So aside from the Focus giving us more heals and more damage, we're also going to be getting some attributes from this. So the first bonus we're going to be getting is 10% mana regen rate, and then also 10% fishing line tension. So the mana regen rate is going to be really helpful here. Then from the second bonus, we're getting a plus 20 to our mana pool. So that's just the overall number of mana that you can have. You also get a 10% yield increase when salvaging. And then from our third bonus, we're going to be getting plus 20% healing output. This one is huge, really helpful for keeping yourself alive and for keeping your teammates alive. And then also a 10% decrease carry weight to fish. And then for our fourth bonus, you're going to get a plus 20% duration on casted buffs. Once again, this is another really beneficial one because you're going to be getting a ton of buffs from your life staff, and you're going to be getting a ton of buffs from your sword and shield. Anything you can do to increase the duration on your buffs, the better, because the longer you're buffed, the better chances you have of staying alive, and the quicker you will be able to take down your enemies. And you'll also be getting a 10% fishing line tension bonus from this. Then our fifth bonus, you get a plus 30 mana on any self or group kill. In addition to the mana regen you already have going, then you'll get another plus 30 mana into your mana pool. So let's say you're at 50 mana. The moment you kill somebody, you'll be at 80 mana. Then you get a plus 10% increase to caught fish size. And then the final buff, which I don't have at the moment, but I would like to get here eventually. When your mana hits 0, gain 200% mana regen for 10 seconds. And then there's a 60-second cooldown on this. And because you're not going to be hitting 0 mana every 60 seconds, you're almost always going to have this ability available for you. Finally, you also do get a minus 10% cooldown reduction for in fast travel. And then moving down to our Constitution buffs, which almost all of my Constitution is coming from my gear. So the first bonus makes all health consumables 20% stronger. You also get 10% logging speed. Then the second bonus, increase max health by 10% of your physical armor, which this is a very beneficial bonus, especially if you're using heavy gear. And then you also get a 10% reduction on durability loss for tools. And then our third bonus, minus 10% to critical damage taken. This one is another really huge buff, going to be very beneficial, especially if you have full void bent gear, because all of that gear has a reduction to critical damage taken as well. So that will stack on top of this bonus. And then finally, you also get a minus 10% decrease in weight of logging items. Now moving on to gear, I recommend using heavy gear when you're using this build. And the heavy gear that I'm using is a full void bent set, which gives you the maximum amount of Constitution stats. And then you also get that reduction in critical damage that I was just talking about. Now, a lot of people probably don't have void bent gear yet, and you may not be able to afford this yet, and you don't need to have this void bent gear. Void bent gear is basically the most end game gear that you can get. Just make sure that you get all heavy gear, and then the stats that you're getting on this gear, make sure that it's Constitution and Focus. Like I was saying earlier, the main thing that you want to shoot for is to have 300 Focus and then 150 Constitution. And then back to what I was talking about earlier, you want to have an Amber Gem on the sword that you're using. And this Amber Gem, it's based on the tier of gem that you have equipped in the sword. If it's a tier 4 gem like I have, this will allow 50% of the damage that the sword does to be converted to nature. And the damage is going to scale off the base weapon stat or the amount of focus, whichever is higher. So because you have so much focus, the damage is going to scale off of the amount of focus that you have. So not only can you do a massive amount of healing, but you can also do a decent amount of damage. And finally, I'm using a diamond gem them in my life staff, and this allows me to do 15% more healing when I'm at full health. To wrap up this video, I'm going to show you how I would use these abilities. So the first thing I would do is shoot out Beacon with the life staff, put down Sacred Ground where I'm going to fight, swap over to the sword and shield, and then I would use all of my abilities right away: reverse stab, whirling blade, and then the leaping strike. And then I would follow up with a heavy attack, and then I would do light attack combos. And then once my abilities are ready again, I would just start using those abilities, and then block when you need to. And every enemy is going to be different, and every situation is going to be different. So that was just a single enemy, whereas before I talked about taking on multiple enemies. So if I do have one of those cases where I'm taking on multiple enemies, I may start with a heavy attack before using my abilities, and then use my light attack combo, and I'd maybe even use my leaping strike, but I would make sure to save my whirling blade and my reverse stab for when all of those enemies are grouped together. Because like I talked about before, if you can get those enemies grouped together, every time that you land the reverse stab or the whirling blade, that's going to reduce your cooldown. So if you look at the bottom right corner of my screen right now, so I use this reverse stab, that reduced the cooldown, and I use whirling blade, that also reduced the cooldown. And then the more enemies that you have next to each other that are hit by that, that just stacks the amount of reduction in cooldown that you get. And if I ever take too much damage in the middle of combat, I'm going to throw down Sacred Ground, and then I'm going to use the Light's Embrace ability on myself. And like I talked about before, that'll heal me for so much, it's almost my entire health bar, as long as you're standing in the Sacred Ground when you use Light's Embrace. And that's all I got for you in this video. So if you have any questions at all, please post them in the comment section. Subscribe for more. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.